Hey guys, I'm Toby and this is a video about how I set up my XT3 for shooting video and film, and specifically I shoot a lot of wedding films, and it may be applicable for those of you who shoot events with your Fujifilm XT3. Now this series is particular for those talented folks who shoot alongside me as a second shooter and are picking up some of my gear and getting oriented to it, so this is a help to them. If you're not one of those people, I still hope it's a help to you, and you can check out the other videos in this series. Let's jump right in. All right, so we are going to jump right into the XT3, which I have here in my hand. And I do use two of these, which is why I have one shooting and one filming this. So what I'm going to do is first go over the physical controls around the camera to get you oriented into that. Then I'll work through the buttons, so primarily these four and some function buttons, and then also the menu system, which is, it kind of defaults into a shortcut, so we'll go through that. So first, the physical dials. The first thing I'll point out right up front here is the focus control. So this is not common to every manufacturer. This is how Fuji does it. You can see here S stands for single, C for continuous, and M manual. And because we use a combination of autofocus Fuji lenses and adapted lenses where it would be manual focus, this is really important to know. When you kind of turn it back here, it's really going to be your left hand, and if you flick it all the way to the left like this, that'll bring you right into your manual focus. So that means for those manual focus lenses, that's what you do. Now it's a little tricky because when you do use those autofocus lenses, you want to select continuous, which is the middle dial. So it can be a little tricky, but that's what C stands for. M is really easy to get to, clicking all the way. C is one click back. And I'll tell you just a little later why this is really important when we switch lenses. Looking up top here, this is something Fuji is well known for. Here is on the left hand the ISO dial. You can see it. A here is auto, L is as low as it gets, but basically for video shooting purposes, we tend to use anywhere from kind of 200 all the way up to 3200. Sometimes if we really need to push that high, 6400. With the lenses I use, typically we don't have to go that high, but some areas, especially some receptions, can get really dim, so we can get that high. Right below it, really important here, typically you can see with that movie dial, that's where it'll be. If for some reason we're taking some photos, S stands for single, CL, continuous low, continuous high. But if for some reason things don't look right, it could be that this got moved, because this will bring you to your photo settings. This is dedicated for video. So that's on this left side here. Moving over to the right side, you can see this is our shutter speed dial. And important to note here is that along with this dial, this large dial, let me turn it on here, we can also use this thumb dial right here with our right thumb to dial in between these default numbers. So you see 60, 125, 250. And this is particularly important, as you can see here. Right now I have it set to 60. Now what happens is, you can see 60 there. We can then further use this dial on our right hand to dial it down to 1/48, or 48 shutter speed right there. So that's really handy, especially because when we're shooting 24p, 24 frames a second, we want that shutter speed to be 1/48. So there's kind of two components to that. This dial here, and then this dial, which helps us dial it in, haha. This is the exposure compensation dial. Because we typically shoot manual, we control everything. You really don't need to pay too much attention here. So those are the physical dials plus the front there. I'm going to now move into this control pad right here. And each one of these goes into a kind of a shortcut or a custom setting that is really handy while we're shooting, while we're getting exposure right. The first one, the very top, which is, I'd call like 12 o'clock. So that top, this is often called the D pad. It doesn't look like a D, but 12 o'clock here, that is going to turn your face detect on and off. So there you go, face detection off, face detection on, or an eye auto. Now, why, let me just dial that down. Why that is important is because when we switch between continuous and manual focus, let's say you're switching lenses, you switch back to an autofocus lens like one of these Fuji lenses, it automatically defaults to face detect off. So that's what happens. If let's say I turn it on, you can see that little eye here on the screen, I'm going to switch to manual. All right, so I'm technically in manual focus. Now I switch back to continuous or single. Now in this case, it actually stayed there. But oftentimes when you go back, that eye autofocus turns off. So it's really handy to turn that on or off. And this is also good to know if you're using autofocus lens and the scene is just too busy for it to really catch on to a face, there's too many faces. Being able to turn that off means that center box can just be your autofocus point, and then that makes it really easy to control. So let me actually, if I turn it to continuous, and then, so right now eye autofocus is off and it should be keeping that in focus, more or less, whatever's in the center. The second button, this is like the 3 o'clock button. This is the white balance. So right now you can see it's set to auto. Typically we do set it by Kelvin, and there'll be another video explaining which ones we use and why. But most typically we will not use auto. We don't want it to kind of think for itself in this particular case. Typically for outdoors we're at 5600 Kelvin, and that changes per room. And this is really important because as a video shooter, it's not like a raw photo where you can really push and pull it. We set these to make sure that we're all on the same page. Our white balance is set, and that's why this shortcut is here. Moving down to the 6 o'clock position is the audio settings. So this is right now set to auto. You can see you can go into manual, and then here you can dial in the decibel settings. And this is really important because typically when we use something like this is like that Rode mic that we can set on top. If we're just kind of getting ambient sound, I'm happy with using auto. But if, for instance, you are connected to a device like this is the wireless Go, where let's say we're getting a feed from either the groom or the officiant or a signal from the DJ. Once this is attached and into the camera, what we want to do is make sure we get these levels down where we need them. And that's going to change depending on what the source is, whether it's music, whether it's a DJ, whether the sound booth, or whether it's from the groom or the officiant, whoever we're miking. So that's why this is here. You can toggle typically again auto for mic, and we'll switch into manual if we are recording a feed right into the camera. And then moving over to our 9 o'clock position, this is the film simulation. This is pretty static. It's really typically set on Eterna. In some cases we will shoot log, and I will show you where that is in a few moments. A few more custom buttons to point out that are important for us as video shooters. The first one here is this one labeled AEL. This has been programmed to auto focus on or auto focus lock. And this is how this is useful. When you are shoot in manual mode, but still with a lens that can autofocus, whether that's a Fuji lens or an adapted EF Canon mount like this to electronic adapter, what you can do is use this button to then push and focus. Now, this is too close, so it's not doing it. All right, so I'm in manual focus, so technically I should use the manual focus ring here, but I'm actually going to push and focus. And that means it could do that one time and lock on. So that's handy. It's also handy when you're back in autofocus and it's getting a little, it's just getting a little confused and moving too much. Holding this down means you will lock your autofocus. So you can see here, it says AFL. So let's say I'm shooting an interview or some person and it does, the face detect does find that person, but then for some reason it's being a little shifty and I can't do a retake here. I can use my thumb. Once it's locked onto the face or where I want it, I can hold it down and the autofocus point locks. So that's right there. The other important function button, there's two more. This one right here, what does say function right on the top, is what is programmed for high speed recording. So in particular, we're talking, let me just change the battery. Okay, we're back. As I was saying, this is the function button which we have set to high speed recording. So you can see there it's off right now because we're shooting, I believe, at 4K 24p, 24 frames a second. In some cases, we do want really slow motion, and what we can do here is dial it up twice, so you can see FHD stands for full high definition, which is 1080p. It records it at 120 frames per second and then automatically outputs it at 24 frames per second, which is what we want. And what we do need to know is there's no sound with that, so that's just slow motion. And I would say we use this rarely, but we do use it sometimes. Let's say for portrait moments or certain dance moments, I will kind of do some in 24p and then jump in, do some in really slow motion, and that's often pretty nice to kind of cut in. So that's why that function button's there. The last function button I want to point out to you is on the front side, which is right here, and it's accessed by your right hand, typically with your index finger or your middle finger, and that is the focus punching in. So if we are in manual focus, I'll switch to manual focus. Hitting that button means I can jump in, and this is like about 2 times. You can even dial it in further with this dial here. But it really, if you're using a manual focus lens, it really helps to check focus, and you can focus from there. It's really handy. You can even do it while recording as well, so it's a really good thing to know there. The one thing to note is you do want to make sure you have a microphone like this one on the camera, because if you're just using the internals and the audio is important at that point, you will hear this click, which is pretty subtle, but it will be audible. So that those are pretty much the outer parts of the camera that are important and that are set up for video shooting, and particularly wedding videos. Want to show you one last thing, and that's jumping into the menu right here. Now, the way Fuji has it is when you hit this menu OK button, it automatically brings you to this my menu, which is, customized and pre-selected. I want to especially draw your attention to the first two settings. It is grayed out because that first one, we are still in high speed record mode. So let me turn that off. All right. Back to 24p. I hit menu. First, real important at the top here is movie mode. So notice here it says 4K, 24 frames a second. I can hit the right button here. And now you can see all our options. So this is on the left side, the size. Here's the frame rate, and here's the bit rate, how much data we want. Typically, we will shoot in 4K in either 24 frames a second, or in some cases, 60 frames a second. So this is where we would dial in. I might say to you, hey, let's go back to 24p, and this is where you do it. Or I'd say, hey, let's shoot this at 60p, and you would come down here, dial it to 5994. I do typically shoot at 100 megabits per second, so that you don't need to worry about that. You can hit menu OK. You can see it's reflected there, 4K 5994. So now we are that, and that's also on this screen right here. The second important item in this menu is the F-log recording. In some cases, if we're shooting a ceremony outdoors and there's a lot of bright sunlight and a lot of dark shadows, we will use the log profile. And this is how we change it. We click it right in there. And this, you can see here, says SD and HDMI. This is because you have some people record from their HDMI send. We don't. But you can see if we wanted to record an F-log, we would say, okay, send F-log to the SD. And you can see there's other combinations here. But that would be basically how we would shoot F-log. And if I get out of this, you can see automatically it looks a bit flatter in the profile, and that gives us a bit more latitude in terms of color grading. And I think that's pretty much it for the first walk around. The physical dials out here, we covered the D-pad over here, and then a couple of other function buttons here, and my menu. So thanks for watching.